The achievements of past generations nurture our souls, give us a deeper understanding of history and our place in it, and help us recognize the connections that make us all human. Since 1965, World Monuments Fund has partnered with local communities and governments in more than 600 locations on all 7 continents to honor their cultural heritage, helping to preserve it with traditional techniques as well as the latest science, creating economic opportunities and learning from one another. As we look to the future, our collective heritage is an untapped resource that can fuel our imagination, creativity, and economy. Join us in our work creating a world that merges past and present, where local communities live in harmony with the monuments they've grown up around, and where a greater understanding of each other's cultures leads to a brighter and more compassionate world.
Hello and welcome wherever you are in the world. I'm Bénédicte de Montlaur and I'm the CEO of World Monuments Fund. I would have loved to welcome you for this spring spotlight on this beautiful day in New York to talk about cultural heritage. But here we are, locked at home, and I thank you for joining. I hope you and your families are doing well. I imagine your life has changed a lot. Our life at World Monuments Fund has changed a lot too. And I know my team is here watching, and I want to thank them. They are an amazing team. And we've spent the last 2 months overseeing the 62 projects we run in more than 30 countries. Since the beginning of this pandemic, our priority has been the safety of everyone involved with us. For each project, we had to make decisions regarding the continuity of protocols of preservation. We worked with local government to ensure the safety of the sites. We paused the majority of our projects while continuing to support our workers and our partners. As you can imagine, this has involved a lot of unexpected costs, and this is why we created the World Monuments Relief Fund. Our goal here is to continue to support our team so that we can go back on site as soon as it is safe to do so, to continue finding innovative solutions to integrate cultural heritage in the present, to create opportunities around it, and to carrying it into the future. So today, I want to thank all of those who contributed already to that fund. First of all, the chairs of this event, Bernard and Lisa Sells, as well as Lorna and Eddie Goodman, but also our very generous benefit committee, our trustees, and all of you who joined us and who discovered us online or through our project. Today, we're going to talk about cultural heritage and how this pandemic has impacted it. We are also going to talk about the role that historic sites and the people who work around them can play in the months and years to come. I'm very honored to be joined by 3 extraordinary speakers, 3 people with incredible knowledge and complementary perspectives. So first of all, joining us from Karachi is Yasmeen Lari. Yasmeen is the first female architect of Pakistan. She has designed many landmark commercial buildings in that country. She is also the CEO and co-founder of the Heritage Foundation of Pakistan and a Jane Drew and Fukuoka Prize laureate. She has conserved several 15th and 17th century historic monuments at Makli World Heritage Site. She has also founded Barefoot Social Architecture, a mechanism for providing social and ecological justice to marginalized communities. Joining us from New York, in fact, just a block from me, is Barry Bergdoll. Barry is the Mayer Shapiro Professor of Art History and Archaeology at Columbia University. And from 2007 to 2013, he was the Chief Curator of Architecture and Design at the Museum of Modern Art. We are also privileged to count him as the chair of the Modernism Prize. Finally, joining us from London is Tristram Hunt. Tristram is the current director of the Victoria and Albert Museum. And prior to joining the V&A, Tristram Hunt was Member of Parliament and Shadow Secretary of Education. He has a PhD from the University of Cambridge, and he is the author of several books, including 10 cities that made an empire. So I'm sure you want to engage with the speakers. So we will take some questions from the audience at the end of this conversation, and you can start typing those questions in the box at the bottom of your screen. You just type it and you press send. Very easy. And without further ado, let's welcome our panelists. So hello, welcome Tristram, Barry, Yasmeen. Thank you. It's a technological adventure. Everything is working well. So I'm curious, like I'm sure you all travel a lot. So Yasmeen, which is the site that you're dreaming of going to once we can travel again?
Well, Benedict, I'm not feeling very ambitious, so I think I would really like to go back to Makli, where I haven't been able to visit for several months now because of this whole pandemic business. And so there's just so much to be done there, and the site itself is just amazing. So I just love to go there, but also because there are so many people engaged in the works that are going on that I really need to go and see them. So I think I'll just trek around to Makli, not much further.
And you, Barry, where would you like to go?
Maybe I'm too ambitious. I want to pick up life where it was the week before we went into lockdown. I was meant to be getting on a plane for Sri Lanka and for Lebanon in a rather crazy trip. But I'm dying to take up the offer of a graduate student in Beirut to take me to Baalbek in Lebanon, where I've always wanted to go, and on to see Niemeyer's buildings in Tripoli.
And you, Tristram?
Oh, well, as a European, you always dream of Venice. At times of crisis and plague and lockdown, you should always have Venice in your mind. And we were going to go to the Architecture Biennale, the V&A. Was going to put on a pavilion there this year, exploring the history of the British mosque, the design of the British mosque. And we can't do it, so I'm dreaming of Venice, but it'll have to wait.
Yeah, with World Monument Fund, we were supposed to go to Venice for the Biennale too. And in fact, I just heard it's postponed to next June, so maybe we'll meet there. But in the meantime, I would like to know your opinion about the role that monuments play in people's lives. What do you think of this concept of the power of place? Do you think there is a kind of healing power of monuments that could help us after this trauma, after this crisis?
I think there's a very strong healing power in the bricks and the cityscapes and the feel of great monuments such as those you do so much to protect, particularly in these difficult times. I look back to the work of John Ruskin, whether it was his thinking about the Doge's Palace in Venice or William Morris and Tewkesbury Abbey, and this sense at the period of extraordinary change in Britain, the Industrial Revolution, urbanisation, mass population growth, that there was something profoundly soul-enhancing and enriching, and from their perspective, actually, socialist, about the power and wonder of these objects, and connecting to the stones which in and of themselves in many ways were acts of opposition to the trauma and speed of contemporary change, was a soul enhancing moment. So I think that great works of architecture, great works of design and of planning do have this very important moment in our lives today.
And Barry, I'm sure you've thought about that too. Like, do you have like an opinion about this power of place and the role of monument and what's happening there that at historic monuments that wouldn't happen elsewhere?
Yes, in fact, being an art historian, I can't go anywhere without images, so I actually brought some along. I don't know if now's the time you'd like to look at them together. Yes, or later on?
Yes, maybe we can talk, in fact, about this relationship, about like, I mean, at the moment, we are all thinking about how the world is going to be different after this crisis. And there is a relationship between society and architecture. And I would love, in fact, to get your historical perspective on this dialogue between architecture and society.
Well,
can you give me some examples of building?
Yes, I've been thinking since you invited me to be here today with this, which is such an honor and also such a challenge because it's such a daunting topic, that I think many people will want now to write histories of how these moments of cultural crisis have in fact generated much of the architecture of the world. We could almost retitle today's meeting Cultural Change from Crisis, and look at how many monuments derive, in fact, from moments of great turmoil and from rebuilding and rethinking the world after war, but also after major health events. I was thinking, and I actually brought along some images of two islands that became the seeds of how great cities were changed and grew, that came out of health crises. And one is that I have some images of. We've had our attention focused for the last year before we went into lockdown about the tragic fire last April at Notre Dame. And there was an absolutely wonderful program here recently on the perils of fire. Now we have the perils of health. But the Hôtel Dieu, the central hospital of Paris, which is today in the shadow of Notre Dame, is itself a monument that comes out of health crises that took place in the 18th century, and the complete change in attitude about here you see it actually being projected. You see the towers of Notre Dame, but in front of it are the remnants of the central hospital of Paris. This was a place that when it burned in 1772 gave rise to a discussion about the relationship of health and space, health and buildings, and health and cities that completely changed the way modern cities look. You see here people crowding into wards. It was the first time that people began to realize that the spacing, this is social distancing in the 18th century, that the spacing between people had something to do with contagion and health. And in the next image that I want to show you, we have two of the most innovative and challenging designs of this hospital debate of the late 18th century. This is in the next image if it comes up, which we're going to show you two ideal projects where people tried to lay out a hospital with such a perfection of spacing between beds, between wards, between outdoor spaces and indoor spaces, that people began to think of the hospital not as a place to go to die, but as a machine for curing. And finally, all of those, there you see them just coming on the screen, two different proposals for what an ideal hospital should look like. But I also wanted to invite everyone to think about this hospital design, and we're so related to our hospitals now, even in our isolation. And indeed, Tristram spoke of Venice. The whole term of isolation and quarantine comes from Venice and the idea of being able to isolate people in order to reintegrate them in society. That will come for us. But in the third image, which I hope will pop up next, I wanted to remind everyone of how that thinking about individual buildings led to a revolution in the very way that cities were designed. So that the propositions, which I think there's a little delay here, but you'll see in a moment, an attempt to redesign the street and the way the buildings relate to the street, there you see it, itself comes from this hospital debate. So Paris as we love it, those of you who might answered your question, maybe you would have, Benedict, I want to go to Paris. The Paris that we love, the Paris of boulevards, wide spaces, relationship of buildings to green spaces, this comes out of a health crisis that began in the 18th century. And as you'll see in the next set of images that will come up, the complete transformation of Paris from a medieval city of unhealthy overcrowding to a complete rebuilding, in my fourth image, of the center of the city, where the replanning of the central hospital in the wake of Notre Dame, in the shadow of Notre Dame, and the city itself took shape together. So the cities that we long to get back to, the outdoors that we long to get back to, have been shaped progressively over centuries by health crises, by monuments that are today World Heritage that come out of responding to heritage. There you see the images of Paris, the bridge that was crowded with houses and unhealthy, and the clearing of Paris for the creation of the modern hospital that is today in transition, a monument that is very much a reflection about what its future will be. And just one last image, because I'm speaking around the block from you, but we can't sit in the same room, of thinking of New York. Of course, New York is an island, but New York has another island that has always been a laboratory for the way the city might grow and be more healthy. And in this last set of images, image number 5, I put together just some postcard views and historic views to remind us that what we today call Roosevelt Island was a laboratory for thinking in the early 20th century about the way hospital design might in fact affect New York City. So today, 14,000 people live on Roosevelt Island. It's one of the great thriving neighborhoods of New York, but its shaping too comes out of the monuments of hospitals. Maybe we'll be thinking about our historic hospitals even and their relationship differently as the world stops once a day to proclaim how much we owe to our health workers. So monuments and health crises go hand in hand, even if we're only looking at things on Instagram and on broadcast lunches. So sorry, I can never go to a lunch without images, Benedict.
Yes. No, thank you, Barry. That's fascinating to see that, in fact, it's not only one or two buildings or one or two hospitals that are related to health. In fact, it's the whole structure of cities. And maybe I will turn to you, Yasmeen, to talk about the future. I know one of your main focuses is a revitalization of traditional techniques. And I was wondering whether you think that some of those traditional techniques that you revived at Makli, this extraordinary World Heritage Site in Pakistan, do you think some of these techniques will help us cope with today's health challenges?
Oh, absolutely, Benedict. I think, when we, especially in Pakistan, when we talk of heritage, it's not only just monuments. I think it's for the people that we have, it's really the vernacular traditions and the vernacular designs that are so important, because pattern is so important in their lives, so it's everywhere. And that's why I feel that we need to really now start spending more time and resources on trying to see what had been there in terms of vernacular constructions, and to see we document them and to use them for contemporary use. Also, we must remember that whatever was done, in our rural areas, for instance, it was all very kind of ecologically done in the manner that nothing was wasted. And in today's world, when we have so much problems of climate change and there's sort of carbon emissions everywhere, I think that's the kind of sources we have to go back to. But there's not enough attention when we talk of heritage. I find that it's not something that's taken up very seriously. But in Makli, because I work with women, so and they carry the traditions actually. As you know,
can you tell me what is the situation there at the moment at Makli, and what is the impact of the current crisis on the site and of the people who live there?
Sure. I'd be happy to, because I don't think people know very much about Makli, which is a World Heritage Site. And it's an absolutely spectacular site, really, because it spans over about 400 years. It has a rare combination of tangible and intangible heritage. There are not many sites, I think, in the world where you find both of these different kinds of heritage that coexist. And then there are remains of almost 60 mausoleums of rulers and princes, and at the same time, Sufi shrines are there too. And this is like a sanctuary of peace, actually, Makli is. It has an air of spiritualism, which is all-pervading, and for centuries, messages of tolerance have been sent out of all faiths. So it attracts thousands of, hundreds of thousands, actually, of devotees who come to the shrines there. And also, we have to see that it draws a lot of beggars there, because they come there for alms. And that's where we've been trying to see how we can get them involved in doing productive work and being part of conservation processes. That's where my women come in, because we've been working with them, but it took some time. It was not that easy to get them involved. I remember that we tried for several years until 2017, when we actually were able to make a breakthrough with one beggar woman, and that was Karima, who we trained in Kashi or glazed ceramics. That was the ancient craft, and there are so many monuments that actually carry that beautiful scintillating Kashi as decorative features. And we were helped here with by UNESCO, UNESCO Paris, actually, where we were able to develop the skill ourselves as well. And she's the one who started to make these miniature tiles. I don't know whether you're familiar with Kashi or the glazed ceramics that we have in Pakistan and also in Central Asia and also Iran. And so that is the craft that we taught Karima, and she started to teach others as well. And this is amazing, because then she started to sell these tiles where she used to beg, and the place that she used to beg from. So that became something that was very interesting and made a go of everything. And then we managed to actually start working with lots of communities of beggars there. Many of them we trained to work in conservation because, as you know, of course, it requires highly skilled and professional people to deal with it. But there are lots of levels at which poor people can also be engaged. And I think more and more in countries like Pakistan, we need to really engage communities. Unless we do that, then really it remains something that is quite aloof, which doesn't actually touch the people who are living around these areas. And we were very lucky that we were able to actually work in about 8 villages. We first started to give them, what I call basic needs. They had no shelter. They're actually living in terrible deprived state where there's no water, there may be nothing. And so they began to learn various skills, which are green skills. Because I don't know whether you know.
So what is their situation now? And do you think, like, I guess there won't be a lot of tourism in the months and years to come. So how are they going to survive around the site?
Well, I'm hoping that they will not have to beg, but I think tourism will not stop because we have these shrines there where, which draws people, the devotees that come from all over the country. They will continue to come. Once the lockdowns are over, I see the same thing going on again. And I think there's a kind of a silver lining here for us that, we might be able to spend more time in trying to take care of our heritage much better, because more and more people will now flock towards the local sites rather than trying to go abroad. So, but these women are now doing
there will be more local tourism around World Heritage sites, like the one you're talking about in Makli, in Pakistan?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Not only Makli, but many other sites as well, I think, yes. So, yeah, but the people who are there, they'll be back to work as soon as the lockdown is over. And even now, because we've trained them in so many green skills, at least 50% of them are actually able to eke out a living now by selling various products. And before the lockdown, there's something like 70% had risen above the poverty line. And that's what we need to do with people, because it's going to be terrible. I mean, the poverty levels are going to rise enormously. And countries like Pakistan will have to make sure that we use heritage for actually poverty alleviation. I think it can be done.
Yeah, and that's wonderful, because I've always thought that heritage was an incredible resource that we may tap into to really deal with the economic consequences of this crisis. But for now, I'm afraid we have to travel, and even locally, to travel digitally. And Tristram, this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about digital resources. You're the director of a museum. So at the moment, with this COVID crisis, we are living increasingly digitally. Like, we connect with culture, with the news, through our computers. And I guess you, like many museums, you put a lot of digital resources online. But our work, like yours, the work of preservation, is very much anchored on the real, the material. So I know everyone says, oh, they are complementary, one feeds the other. But is that true? And is, like, the digital experience, will it replace the physical experience in the future?
I don't think anything can replace the raw sensation and joy of seeing material culture or an artifact or a world monument building for yourself. I think there's something very visceral about the aura of the original. But what we do know is that the more we put online, the more people come through our doors. So if we foreground a particular object, we're going to see more and more people wanting to see that for themselves. So there is this complementarity between the digital and the authentic. I think we're going to live in difficult times with this COVID-19 for a couple of years. So I think there will be more digital collateral put online by museums and cultural organizations. We have incredible capacity now with VR for a realization of whether it's Tutankhamun's tombs, or whether it's Angkor Wat, or whether it's some of the great monuments of the world, to see those from your living room. And I think the more people who understand the wonder of these sites and are interested in their preservation through digital access is a good thing. I think we can also talk to supporters and members and donors much more effectively through digital mechanisms. But I remain with you. The reason why I'm a museum director is because I have this this deep wonder and respect for acts of human creativity. And so whether it's stone carvings or whether it's wooden buildings, or whether in the V&A case it's some of the beautiful tiles from Iran and Pakistan and across Southeast Asia, or whether it's our fashion collections, or whether it's our silverware. So there's still the wonder of the object is so very, very powerful. And I don't think that'll go away. And I think what's interesting is we're going to see, when the kind of lockdown lifts, is there this great thirst for seeing the objects for themselves, having had so many Skype conversations and Zoom calls and Google Hangouts, or will people be too nervous about coming to smaller enclosed spaces like museums? And at the V&A, we've got 7 miles of corridors full of great wonders. So we hope we can do physical distancing, but social interaction in front of material culture.
I can tell you right now, I'm dreaming of going to Makli in Pakistan, and I'm dreaming of going to the V&A. But Barry, you've been also a chief curator at MoMA for a long time. So do you have also a point of view on this question of digital resources?
Well, I don't want to just repeat what Tristram has just said, but I think he's absolutely right. I've always thought there was a complementary aspect to it. And in fact, I think it just enhances our desire to go and see real places. I do think, just what I've never had before from this conversation and from the experience that so many of us have had over the last few weeks on Zoom and the like, that we're going to be very eager to get back into a world with spontaneity. And we're going to want to go to the museum and turn around and see a connection between 2 things that an expert hasn't drawn from us. And we're going to want to go to a site and be able to walk around it in a way that a producer of VR or someone who has staged even the most sophisticated visual parallel to it can't make. We're going to be eager for all of our pent-up energies to again go out and rediscover the world. I think it's going to be a very, maybe slow pace, but it's going to be a very euphoric moment. I really don't think, I suppose, as an architectural historian, and as much as I admire VR, I don't think there's any substitute for the experiences of the spaces that have been created around the world. And to echo Tristram also, and Yasmeen also, the materiality and the feeling that another person's hand was there, whether that person's hand was there centuries ago, which is what we feel always in sites that WMF and others are involved with. We want to be able to have that tactile relationship to hands that were there centuries before our own.
Yeah, and it's going to be really exciting once we can again meet and invent things together. And Yasmeen, talking about the future, so what do you think are the main threats to cultural heritage right now? How would you describe it?
Well, I think one of the worst things that's happening is because of climate change, because last year we had this terrible rain, and really the winds were so strong that we lost 2 cupolas, really the old, really quite ancient ones. And I fear that many of the monuments are in a highly degraded state, and they are so exposed and so vulnerable that if we keep on having this kind of freak weather all the time, it's going to affect our sites enormously. And that's why I feel that somehow, rather than concentrating on one big monument and spending so much money on one, for me, I think it's much more appropriate if we try to find local solutions with vernacular methodologies that would provide protection at a very low cost to majority of our monuments and sites. And Pakistan has thousands of sites that are there that are, somehow disappearing without a trace because there's not enough funds to actually take care of them.
Now, so how do you do that, like low cost protection? Like, I'm interested as the head of World Monuments Fund, how do you do, like on a larger scale, how do you protect World Heritage sites?
Right. Well, I don't think it's that complicated. Actually, I have to tell you, because I've devised something called, a protection mechanism, which is sort of intervention on an emergency basis, where you use local techniques and local, materials that are there and vernacular ways of doing things. And really, these are ones that can be easily replaced and redone. But if somehow, for instance, if you have a monument, and there are so many of them in Makli alone, which has got a cupola that's gone. So what you can do is cover it with bamboo, and I've done quite a lot of bamboo work. It can be very easily done. It can be, sacrificial as well in many ways that you can, remove it afterwards. But it'll buy you time for maybe 10 to 15 years. And that's what I think we need to do. For instance, if those two monuments, we spent maybe $10,000, $15,000, we could have saved them. So why aren't we doing that kind of thing? Because it's more important to save as much as we can today for the generations of tomorrow, rather than taking one monument and spending a huge amount of money. And that's where all the communities get involved. Because otherwise, if you don't have the communities, becoming involved in this, they don't get anything out of these sites. So I think more and more it is important now to involve them, give them the skills, train them, and bring them over to be able to do these very simple methods of, bamboo roof, mud brick for underpinning, lime and mud plasters for ledges and for other exposed surfaces. And you can do it at a very little cost. So I think maybe we should shift the way that we are looking at monuments and conserving them. I'd like to see that happen.
It's really interesting to see this nexus between cultural heritage and climate change, because on the one hand, climate change, like cultural heritage, is really impacted by climate change. Many sites, especially the ones that are close by the sea, are affected by climate change. And on the other hand, in some ways, cultural heritage can bring solutions, because we can see that many traditional techniques we are working on the site, for instance, in India, where there are some traditional water management techniques that could be really helpful if we revitalize them. And I don't know, like Barry, do you have a point of view on that? Like, do you think there are some traditional techniques that will be revived, and did it happen through history? Are we going to build differently?
Well, I think even before this health crisis, the climate change crisis that Yasmeen has been speaking about so pertinently is one that is making many, many people look back to vernacular architecture for lessons. I think there's a stop and start history of modernity, throwing all of its belief in the capacity of technology to invent a completely new world in which everything traditional is no longer relevant, and then rediscovering what has been lost and looking back to the vernacular for new lessons. It's happened in moments of feeling detached from a culture and wanting to reconnect. And I think in the last decade or so, we've been learning a lot from vernacular buildings about how to live responsibly environmentally. And so there's a huge amount to be learned from vernacular buildings. So also preserving them just to have those lessons. And not only the handicraft, but all of the sort of unwritten know-how about ventilation, about materials that conserve energy and the like, are lessons from the vernacular that the highly advanced technological world is now going to be compelled to pay attention to.
Yeah, and that's going to be fascinating. Oh, yeah, Yasmeen, please.
Barry, in Pakistan and the subcontinent, I'm sure in many other countries, there are these old medieval towns which have all kinds of techniques of, how do you live without any mechanical means? For instance, the wind catchers in Tata, very close to Makli, or where Makli actually is, that was amazing. You did not need any electricity to bring the cool air down the chutes, and it's in Iran as well, and so many other countries. And similarly, the way the Mughals used water, for instance, the paradisal gardens of Lahore, for instance, or the Sheesh Mahal in Lahore Fort, the World Heritage Site, where water cooling actually, was used pretty effectively for the rooms and so on. So there are so many techniques we can learn from, old ways of doing things. We should not really throw them out of the window. We should be learning from them, because we have the energy crisis, we have the carbon crisis, and we have the climate change crisis. So we need to be really thinking about these issues and not just, move on. And also, now that we have the pandemic, let's look at our cities. How do we de-densify them? I mean, why do we have all these, enormous concrete and steel towers? Would we need them later on? I mean, there's a lot of work to be done now in terms of for architects and for other professionals who are engaged with the built environment. And we have to be looking at our old solutions to really bring about eco-urbanism in some way, which will be good, I think, and bring about a lot of humanism in the cities. So let's be looking carefully now.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to hear you, because it's true, like cultural heritage is so important at the moment, in fact, to deal with this crisis, because we have so much thinking to do. And I'm interested, Tristram, because you're the head of a museum. And I guess like me, you heard many times at the beginning of this crisis that, well, culture is important, but it's not the priority because hospital and healthcare is a priority. And of course, like we need to support hospital healthcare workers. They are doing such a fantastic job at the moment. But can you imagine, like, if we get out of this crisis with only half of our cultural institutions left? So how do you address this question of, you know, the importance of culture during times of crisis like this one? Is it secondary or is it a priority?
I think in the first instance, there's a hierarchy of need, and one immediately understands that ventilators are needed in hospitals and protective equipment are needed in care homes, and support for nurses and medical workers are there. And that's the first kind of response. But as we're beginning in some Western countries to sort of manage the crisis, we're then thinking about the aftermath. And if we come out of the crisis with no theatres, no galleries, no museums, depleted universities, if the cultural ecology is the victim of this crisis, then something has gone very, very wrong. And I don't particularly like World War II analogies and about fighting battles against a disease, but we all saw that, you know, the great economist John Maynard Keynes always said he was going to use the sort of peace of war to prepare for the kind of turmoil of peace. That actually after war you have to have this kind of moment of reconstruction. And I think it's very, very important that we support a cultural ecology which allows our societies to flourish in the future, because there will be this thirst. We've had this period of great isolation, of great trauma, of great loneliness, of great loss. And the way you come through that is through a cultural environment, through whether it's, you know, historic environments, whether it's acts of social interaction, whether it's a return to materiality, whether it's a return to work, and particularly work with historic monuments, all of those in terms of skills and well-being and the feel of a community, to go to exactly these conversations. And it's interesting that the WHO are talking as much about the mental health crisis now, alongside, you know, the respiratory and the coronary crisis, which is coming out of COVID. So I think it's even more important that governments and donors and supporters support the cultural ecology of societies coming out of COVID, or else this moment of crisis and the opportunities also that come with it for thinking about what matters and what is valuable will be lost.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, this is something that everybody is very trying to figure out at the moment, trying to figure out how to support this ecosystem. And Yasmeen, so what are the very concrete steps that now we can take at World Heritage Site to make sure that we involve the communities? Because as you said, the sustainable, the tourism and the resources coming from tourism are going to disappear for a little while. These communities depend on, tourism. So what can we do very concretely to make sure that they are involved and that we create opportunities for them around the sites?
Well, I mean, if you look at the example of Makli, I mean, as I said, there are thousands of sites in Pakistan. So really, you could start a whole movement with an army of, people from various communities who can be trained. And I can tell you that it's not that difficult to train the people, people who are non-literate or who have nothing. If you train them and they know that there's some benefit to them, they will learn. And that's what we need to do now, really, because as I said, the poverty levels are going to rise enormously in Pakistan. And culture is going to be as we know, the biggest casualty, I think, all over, but certainly in countries like ours, where money will be now needed for all kinds of other activities. So we need to see how we can involve, all these communities for poverty alleviation by training them. So a lot of money, I think, should be now put together for training these communities who live around these sites, and then to involve them into many kind of tasks. Because as I said, it's not necessary just to conserve one monument. We did Sultan Ibrahim, it cost 2.5 crores of rupees, which is what I think it was, $200,000, I think, or something. And I wish that at that time we had said, no, let's try to see that we, save maybe 20 of the monuments, by just giving them this emergency intervention by these very economical means and very low cost means. Because if you use the beggars and other people who live around communities, you can pay them and they start earning. For them, even small amounts of money is a great deal, and they will put in every effort that they have to be able to deliver properly. And I can tell you, the women that we've trained and the way, the care with which they pick up every little bit of evidence that is lying there and put it away safely, it's quite something. So I'm all for trying to see that we spend less money on single monuments, that we spread the funds, whatever there are, to larger number of monuments, buy time for another 15, 20 years, and also involve communities into it, which can be done very, very easily. Now we have all the techniques. We know how we can involve them. They are now very confident, because earlier on it was very difficult to wean them away from whatever they were doing, but now they feel very interested. And they also now feel pride in being part of Makli. And that's what's important, really. It's not just what money you get, but also, feeling of pride and ownership of the site. If you want to say,
And thank you, Yasmeen, for that, because this is really one of the priority at World Monuments Fund, not only to take care of the monuments, but monuments are about people. And so if you don't take care of the people and you do this training and this capacity building and you consult with them on how to preserve the monument, then it's an endless task. You can preserve it, but it will last just a few years and then you have to do it again. So this involvement of community and what you're doing is really extraordinary. And this is what we are trying to do with you. So I think I will have to stop here to take a few questions from the audience. But before that, we're going to watch a very short video about what's happening at our sites all around the world.
As the coronavirus continues to spread, it exacts a steep toll on the economic and social foundations of our societies. Our cultural heritage and the people who strive to preserve and protect it are not exempt. Across the globe, preservation workers now find themselves without work, and the world's most treasured sites are without their most loyal stewards. At World Monuments Fund, the safety of our partners is our top priority. We've ensured that our teams have the resources to protect their health, continue remote planning wherever possible, and return to site work when safe. Around the world, every location and every team has a unique set of needs in this urgent time. In Hyderabad, India, 62 technicians are finally returning safely to their homes and families after being stranded on site for more than a month, thanks to the tireless work of our teams on the ground. At Erbil Citadel in Iraq, World Monuments Fund has a team of 41 people, including Kurds, Syrian refugees, and other internally displaced groups. Through our work together, they find stability and support their families while contributing to the local economy. This is why the need to support our teams and the surrounding communities of these priceless sites is so urgent. And it is why today we ask you to take action with us by supporting the World Monuments Relief Fund. This newly created fund addresses unanticipated financial needs in the wake of this global crisis at heritage sites around the world. The Relief Fund will impact teams and communities on a global scale, those who help conserve and protect humanity's most important treasures for us all. In the aftermath of this crisis, we want to find ourselves in a more harmonious world, where past and present exist together, where local communities are respected, and where we and our children have the resources to look at our history and better understand each other. Thank you for your support.
So as you can see, we are really focused on the future and how we can rethink things. And I have many great questions coming from the audience about this, how we will do things differently. So first of all, here is a question. How does the pandemic change tourism at heritage sites? Will there be more or less? What are the benefits and the costs? Are there any silver lining to this pandemic for cultural heritage sites? So I guess this one is for you, Yasmeen.
Okay. Well, I think that when we wake up after this lockdown, hopefully there'll be a newly developed sense of egalitarianism and humanism that will be more prevalent all around the world. And also that 1% will no longer be inclined to take refuge in shrouded mantles and ivory towers of wealth and privilege. So I think it'll be a different world, obviously, when we all wake up from this. But also, I think what probably is going to be really quite disastrous for tourism, especially in Europe and the US, and as Barry said, going to Venice might become very difficult, and all these much-loved sites and really historic sites may not be visited so much. But there's a silver lining for countries like ours, because that would mean that a lot of people who would normally go to, go across the seas to go and visit one of those beautiful sites in Europe or America will now have to actually focus themselves or find their vacations in heritage sites in Pakistan. So I'm really quite optimistic about the future here. It'll be more localized. People will be going to their own sites. They will not be traveling that much, and maybe it'll help us a lot in trying to see that we save our heritage, because it's the wealthy who really finally, make a difference. And if they don't spend the money in the country but abroad, then it hurts us. But if they are able to do it and they go and see the places, then that would be wonderful. So I think I'm being very optimistic. I think things will be better for Pakistan.
Yeah, and I think this is a great answer to a great question, because cultural heritage always had this complex relationship, with tourism. It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, tourism is necessary, it brings resources, but on the other hand, we all have in mind these images of sites overrun by tourists. So I don't know, like Tristram Barry, do you have any thoughts on tourism and cultural heritage and the change and how we can promote sustainable tourism?
Well, I've been quite struck by, particularly actually in the natural environment, how the absence of tourism has accelerated poaching, has accelerated attacks upon wildlife refuge, and actually the presence of tourism, not only bringing in money, but also keeping those sites active and in the public eye is enormously important. And I think both for the historic environment and the natural environment, well-managed tourism, which is bringing in funds in an equitable way, but also essentially adding value, enormous value, to sites of historic interest to World Monuments Funds as well as natural environments is profoundly important for their long-term sustainability. So I think the sort of total absence of tourism on the one hand, something can begin to look pristine and untouched. On the other hand, if it's pristine and untouched for too long, maybe there isn't the funding and the support and the interest which will give it a viable future.
Yeah, absolutely. So here we have another question from Nepal. So let me read it. So how does, here we are. Okay, the pandemic will leave us with no resources to invest in monuments. What would be the best way out for states to generate resources and protect and conserve heritage? So that's a dire question. No resources for heritage and no resources for culture, I guess. Tristram, do you want to answer this? How do we generate more income?
Well, I mean, there is absolutely a role for supporters and donors and philanthropists and civil society to continue to support charitable institutions, because actually it's the work of civil society closely connected to the community, which more often than not is going to provide a sustainable future for many of these world monuments and other sites. The role of the state, it seems to me, is to have a very rigorous listing and preservation legislation framework which supports the work of civil society and enacts fines and regulations for those who are overdeveloping or destroying those sites. So I think when state works with civil society, with the support of the donor community, that's the most effective manner.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, World Monuments Fund. Oh yeah, please, Yasmeen.
Yeah. Add something. Well, as you know, I also work in the humanitarian field, so I know that there's no dearth of funding for that kind of activity. Everybody is interested in contributing, trying to help people. So I think the more we can involve communities into heritage safeguarding, then a lot of funding from state as well as civil societies can be directed towards it. We have to now somehow tweak things a little bit, not carry on in the same way as before, but try to see how we can now, access funding or so that, it goes to the poor as well as helps in conserving our heritage. I think it is something that can be done if we look at it carefully. And I think World Monuments Fund can actually perhaps do a very good job in doing it because you are really well positioned to do this.
Thank you. And as you know, we are like as a leading private organization, and we rely very much on our philanthropists, our donors who are so generous, as well as on government. So we have like all these sources of funding, and we hope they will continue. But we know people are really committed, in fact, to this work, and that in general, during the previous crisis, they continued to support cultural heritage and culture. Barry, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say, I find it very inspiring, this conversation, and it's one of the rare benefits is that we can have Pakistan, London, New York all speaking together almost in real time, maybe a momentary delay. But I think Yasmeen has so beautifully reminded us that to see an opposition between culture and immediate needs is a kind of false dichotomy. And I think back as a historian to what happened in this country, in the United States, during the 1930s with the WPA projects and the like, that the issues of unemployment, of the real hardships of the economic crisis of that decade were in large measure met by providing work through constructing monuments, being involved in heritage. And today, when cultural heritage is something whose value we recognize, its maintenance, and as Yasmeen has made so clear, the ability to have numerous people employed and gaining work and experience, but also connecting to community through that, seems to be the type of nexus that both governments, but also organizations like WMF can help us understand. It's not an opposition between the economic crisis and culture. Culture's not a luxury choice. Culture is what we're eager to get out and be involved in again. Culture is really the connections that we have between one another. Everybody can write their autobiography during this crisis, but we can't create the monuments that are about society.
Thank you, Barry. That was very eloquent. And I have this question from Nepal. People there say, we are from Nepal working for preservation of Riva, this magnificent site in the Kathmandu Valley. Currently, due to this pandemic, everything is at a standstill. So now restoration work has become even more challenging during this lockdown. How can we best use this time when physical work is not possible? In this part of the world, opening up will take even longer time. So I can answer for us at World Monuments Fund. It's true that during the first week, there is a big part of conservation work that happens at desk. You do plans, you think about the future. So if you're lucky, this happened during moments when you had a lot of computer work to do. But it's true that after a while, you need to be on site. It's a physical work. So that's why we're trying to keep our teams, to continue support them, even if they are not working, because, we've trained all those people. They are qualified. And if we stop supporting them, they will have to go away to find other jobs because they need these jobs. They need them to continue working. And if we want to continue taking care of this cultural heritage, well, we need to support them until the lockdown is over so that we can go back on site and start again, with these protocols of conservation. It's crucial for all the communities around World Heritage sites. So I think we have to stop here, but I really, really wanted to thank you, Yasmeen, Tristram, and Barry, to have accepted to join us in this digital broadcasting adventure. It has been really enlightening, so thank you so much. And thank you for joining. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
I think, thank you. And I think if there is one thing that I take out of this conversation is that each of us and each community, we have really to focus on the future and rethink about how to make a better world, a more respectful world, a more harmonious world. And this is really by looking at what brings us together. And I think at the center of communities, there is really the built environment. This is at the heart of communities. So I hope you will check our website, wmf.org, to know more about our activities and our extraordinary partners all over the world, and that you will join us in saving beauty in the world. So I thank you for being with us today, and I will leave you with our partners from the field for a very, very special farewell. I wish you a great day. Thank you.
From all of us at Friends of Cedar Mesa in Bluff, Utah, at the base of Bears Ears National Monument, thank you for your support.
Gracias a su contribución hemos podido echar para adelante el proyecto más importante de conservación arqueológica que hay ahorita en México.
The money we give, we don't take them for preserve this fort and for train with local workmen then how to do preservation work. We thank you boku and we continue for support to you.
ពួកយើងធ្វើការនៅតំបន់អង្គរអរគុណចំពោះការគ្រប់គ្រងរបស់លោកអ្នកសូមអរគុណអរគុណសម្រាប់ការគ្រប់គ្រងរបស់លោកអ្នក
Gracias.
ขอบคุณท่านที่เมตตานำเงินเข้ามาช่วยเหลือโบราณสถานของเราไว้ให้ลูกหลานได้ดูกันทุกคนขอบคุณครับ